Okay, another Joan Johnston book review. This one is Shameless. Her shameful past makes her an outcast until a lone wolf takes her into his home. Scorned, pregnant, and facing a life without promise, Pippa Greyhawk is stunned when her father announces that they're leaving their home in Australia to take over his estranged father's sprawling Wyoming ranch. Drawn into a bitter family rivalry and feeling like an interloper in her new home, Pippa rides out of the wilderness and meets an intriguing stranger and his pet wolf. The wolf doesn't scare her, but she's very much afraid to trust another man with her heart. Devon Flynn knows all too well going it alone. He lives in an isolated cabin away from the domineering father and the scandal outside his family. Devon's attraction to Pippa is intoxicating and undeniable. But when he tries to get close, she is wary as his once wild wolf. Devon is willing to defy his father and hers to claim Pippa as his own. But winning this wounded, wonderful woman, love might be the greatest battle of all. And it is. It's another one of those outstanding reads. I would say this one is going to be a 25. Not as great as a 30 because I just couldn't get behind having a pet wolf. But I could see the lone wolf kind of thing, as a kind of more than a symbolism, but more as a way of his life. And he has this way of wanting to care for wounded animals, whether it's a bird, an owl, or a wolf, and he nurses it back to health. So that's kind of another signal as that he likes to be alone in his own world, if you will. I did mark some pages to share with you in this one. The prologue, basically, to get you to know that Pippa Greyhawk was a horse whisperer in Australia. She spent most of her 19 years taming brumbies, wild horses, on her father's remote cattle station in the Northern Territory. She was so good with animals that her wild stallion was soon gentled and eating from her hand. But when it came to men, or rather one particular man, her instincts had utterly failed her. Pippa whimpered at the pressed frigid bag of ice against the painful bruise on her cheek. She had made a terrible mistake, but one she would never make again. A flush of shame heated her face. How gullible she'd been. How naive. She gritted her teeth to still quiver her chin. From now on, she would know better than to trust. She would know better than to give her heart so freely. No man would hurt her again. Page 6 and 7. Basically, this is the part where her dad tells her, "I told you to stay away from him." And then she feels like a fool because she finds out that he was a married man. There was never going to be a marriage between the two. So, that's basically what that says. Trying to see why I marked page 9. Oh, she tells her dad that she's expecting. And her dad's like saying, okay, you can get rid of it and we can still live here, yada, yada, yada. And then she's like, no, I'm keeping it. And her dad's not happy with that, but they go home anyway. Page 26. This nightmare, she feels like, is all her fault. If I hadn't been so gullible, we'd still be in Australia. There'd be no resentful relatives to make my life hell. And moving forward. Notice how fast I'm doing this tonight, too. Let's see. This is where she meets Devon for the first time. The stranger was dressed like one of King's cowhands in a buff cowboy hat, blue chambray shirt, fleece vest, jeans, chaps, and boots. His presence made perfect sense considering the fact that she was riding across a meadow filled with cattle. Then he smiled, his gray, green-eyed, crinkling at the corners, his lips uplifted more on one side than the other, and Pippa felt all the tension ease out of her. "Good morning," he said in a rich baritone voice. "What brings you here?" Pippa realized she was smiling back. Her smile broadened as she said, "I'm just enjoying the sunshine." "Me too." He held up a paper bag, then gestured toward a pond surrounding on the three sides of the budding aspens and vivid evergreens. "I was going to eat breakfast. Want to join me?" Pippa realized that her morning sickness had been past that day, and she was ravenous. The little tucker sounded wonderful. "Sure." He kicked his mounted and so they were riding side by side as they headed for the idyllic spot. "You must be one of those new arrivals from Australia." Pippa cocked her head. "How do you know? Your accent gives you away. I like it, by the way." Pippa laughed and smiled. She liked the fact that he offered her to share his breakfast. She liked the way he was easy in the saddle, and how one large calloused hand held the reins while the other rested on his thigh. She especially liked the day-old beard on his jaw and his warm moss green eyes. Pippa felt surprising I can't even talk tonight. I apologize. Frisson of physical awareness skittered down her spine. She stared wide-eyed at the stranger beside her, suddenly breathing, conscious of a strong desire to get to know more about him. Pippa warned herself to be careful. She had no intention of letting another man into her life right now, especially one charming cowboy as this. They reached the pond, and he dismounted and tied his reins to a budding aspen branch. He crossed the catch to the range horse's mouth as he dismounted, and then tied her horse off to next to his. Then, without making an attempt to touch her, he headed toward a broad, flat stone, the perfect height to sit on, at the edge of the pond. "King had the stone put here," he said as he dropped onto it. 30, 31, 32, and 33. I guess we'll read the first meeting. "Why would he do that?" Pippa she asked as she joined them on the sun-warmed river rock. "I think he's used to come here alone and think." "And he doesn't any more?" He shot her a wry smile. "Nobody ever comes here these days but me and these cows." Pippa leaned back on her palms, inhaling the crisp scent of the pines and listening to the jays calling to each other in the evergreens as she watched two white trumpeter swans glide across the pond. "That's a shame. It's beautiful here." He compliments her, and then she's a little nervous, and they share dinner, or breakfast, not dinner. She says, "I could have eaten at home this morning," or he said that, "but then you have to admit there's something about eating outdoors and it makes everything better." He smiled again, putting her back at ease, asked how she likes living in Kingdom Come, and she says she opened her mouth to admit the truth and shut it again. King's brats were mean as cat wee, and they were also her aunts. She didn't want to badmouth her family to a stranger, especially one of King's cowhands. She settled for saying, "It's not what I expected." "Better or worse?" he asked. She just shook her head and pinned down, "Just different. Everyone is curious about how you're getting along." "Why is that?" "It's just common knowledge that Matt brought his grown daughter home with him, but nobody's seen the hide nor hair of you in town." "I haven't had any reason to go to town, and growing up, driving up on the opposite side of the road in Australia, she was still leery of traveling on the highway." "To be honest, I don't go into town much myself," he admitted. "Why not?" "Prefer my own company, I guess." "Oh." And did that mean he wasn't interested in making a new friend? "What?" "I was hoping that we could be friends." Biscuit crumb. He reached across and rubbed it off her lip. He never had a female friend, but it sounded like something he was worth exploring. He says they come here now and then. He says, "When will I see you again?" And so then they'd make a tentative date for Sunday. And she feels happy and hopeful as she heads back into the forest. Next time she'd ask the stranger's name and find out who he was and where he lived. And she would ask him all those other things that she'd forgotten to ask because she was entranced by his lopsided smile and a pair of mesmerizing green eyes. 34 and 35. 39. Tears stung her nose, and one fell into her cheek. She angrily brushed it away. Tears solved nothing. She had to start planning for life for herself and her unborn baby. But she wondered, without lost dreams of a husband, where would she have a happy home? She heard a low growl and then froze. This is where she meets his wolf. Yeah, pet wolf, mind you. She had no weapon with her. Behind her, a familiar voice said, "Hello again." "Be careful, there's something." The growl came again, and right beside her, Pippa saw the wolf's eyes, and its sharp teeth reflected in the moonlight struggled to hold its ground against the wild beef. "Don't move," the stranger said, the voice filled with enough warning to raise hairs on the back of her neck. "Stay back," she whispered. "Wolf," he said, "sit." The wolf licked its chops, but then sat down meekly in front of her. And then I thought I was done for, and then she learns about the wolf, and it must have sensed some threat in her because now it was suddenly on its feet again, growling low in its throat. But she took a deep, calming breath. It was a struggle not to let her bad experience with Tim and her fear of trusting another man influence what just happened, but she wanted to believe the stranger had only good intentions. "It's all right, Wolf. I'm not going to hurt him, and he's not going to hurt me." She reached down and scratched the wolf behind the ears. A moment later, "How did you do that?" "Do what?" "Lay hands on Beowulf without getting bitten." "I thought he was tame." "Far from it," the stranger said. "He's been willing to share my company and obey a few commands, but Wolf's never let anyone except me touch him." "What did you do to him?" Pippa felt the stranger's grasp of her elbow. "I guess animals know when someone likes them. I've raised Wolf from a pup, and I can tell you that he's nearly taken my hand off a few times enough. Even though I like him just fine, I have a healthy respect for the fact that he's a dangerous predator." "How did you end up with a wolf as a pet?" "I heard a gunshot where no one should be hunting and found his mother dead. When I tracked by the way to the den, the single pup I found there was way too young to live on its own, so I took him home with me, and I'm not sure I made the right decision." "It sounds like Wolf wouldn't have survived without your help." "Likely not, but he's a fish out of water now." "What do you mean?" "He's too wild to be around people, but he's lost his fear of humans, so he can't go back to the wild. There are enough ranchers around here who don't like wolves preying on their cattle that he'd end up getting shot for sure." Pippa felt sorry for the wolf's plight. "Come here, Wolf." The wolf rose and came to her, and with his nose open to her palm. "I think Wolf's lucky that you came along. Come join me." "What are you doing out here in the middle of the night?" he asked. "It's a long story. I don't have anywhere else to be." Pippa opened her mouth. "I'd rather talk to you to start with. What's your name?" "I was afraid you were going to ask that." "Afraid? Why?" "I'm Devon Flynn." Pippa gasped. The man she thought was one of her grandfather's cowhands was actually the youngest son of King's mortal enemy, Angus Flynn. See why I love this writing and the story? It just grabs you in, makes you feel so deep and so like passionate that you have to know what's going to happen next, so you're glued to it. Devon knew exactly who Pippa was from the moment he laid eyes on her. Those awful Flynn boys were the bane of her aunt's existence, but he'd been entranced by her compelling gray eyes and an air of loneliness that he understood far too well, that since he lived in a secluded cabin in the woods with animals rather than humans for company. So he kept his identity secret. He stayed away from the pond because he'd known that any relationship with her, even a friendship, would be fraught with difficulties because of the isolated life he preferred to live, and of course, the feud between their families. Not that her father had any part of the feud. In fact, the last year of her life, Matt's mother, Jane, had lived with Angus and his son. The 16-year-old Matt had been a constant presence at the Flynn supper table. Jane's death, which Angus blamed on the King's treatment on her during the marriage, created a hate in Angus that had survived and thrived for 20 years. In return, King blamed Matt's disappearance on Angus, and Angus had never denied it. Devon had only been 8 at the time, but that was old enough to know what a 17-year-old Matt had been sullen and short-tempered in months and weeks before they departed. Now Matt was back with a daughter who had to have been born after he left. With Pippa, the reason that he disappeared? Devon eyed extraordinary young woman askance, but she must be something special to Wolf to have given her his trust. He wondered what burden she was carrying, what she was making her so sad. She reminded him of one of the wounded animals he was forever rescuing, desperately in need of a safe haven where she could rest and heal. He just wasn't sure he was the right person to help her in this particular case. With his injured animals, he was always careful to keep his distance, to let them remain wild creatures they were, to stay carefully detached so that he could let them go whenever they were ready to leave in his care. It was how he always lived his life where humans were concerned as well, disconnected, separate, and alone. From a very young age, Devon had felt like he hadn't belonged to his family, to which he'd been born. He didn't look the same, he didn't like doing the same things as his 3 older brothers, and he was been 6 years old when he heard his father utter the words, "He killed his mother, or she'd still be with us today," and he looks just like. Devon knew he wasn't supposed to be listening because his father caught sight of him and he cut off. Devon had asked the eldest brother, Aiden, what the father meant, and he doesn't mean you actually killed her. It just wasn't anything you did wrong. It just means that Mom died when you were born. But how could that be responsible when she died giving birth to him? Dad blames me for killing my mother. He felt guilty and ashamed, and despite Aiden's dismissal of the responsibility for their mother's death, he couldn't believe that his brothers didn't blame him just a little. If not for him, for their mother would still be alive. And then we're going to learn a little bit here that Angus Flynn is not his father. So that creates a little bit of who is his father, a little bit of mystery. kind of intrigue. Uh, Still a little bit more about that. His behavior with Pippa had been no different from his usual response upon meeting someone new. As soon as he recognized the depth of his attraction to her, he drawn back. A woman like Pippa, a woman whom he felt with such an instant affinity, could steal his heart and then destroy him. Better keep his distance, better not to get involved. And yet, there was something about her that made him yearn for that emotional connection with another human being that was missing from his life. Maybe Pippa was different. Certainly his reaction to her had been different. Devon had attempted to turn and walk away from her to protect himself from the disappointment of discovering that he was nothing special after all. But something kept him standing there until the last he said, "You haven't told me what brings you here in the middle of the night." "That brats, of course. I have a little experience with them myself. I remember a long walk back from the middle of nowhere once when Brian and I went hunting." She lifted a questioning brow. The twins had put a whole lot of gas in Brian's truck. We got back by letting the air out of all four tires when they were picnicking at Berry Creek, one of the more isolated Grand Teton National Parks. They came back to the car at dusk and didn't get out of there till midnight. "I'm surprised you hung around that long. Wouldn't have been much fun if we hadn't seen it pay off." They share a little bit more of that. Then she emphasized the word friend. Okay. She's telling him how they should be friends. Okay. And let's see. "I was hoping that you would come back so I could talk to you again," she said, shooting him a look beneath the low lashes. He felt like a spurt of pleasure had told himself, "Whoa, cowboy." He already had one lesson tonight on how quickly, with how little effort, she could be around him. Now that he didn't want her in his bed, he had just to make sure that there was no understanding the rules, that if she it was boom boom, he wanted nothing more. It was like being doused with cold water when she added, "Like I said before, I could use a really good friend." She emphasized the word friend in a way that told him in no uncertain terms that she interested in a relationship that ended up in bed. That was new. That was different. That was not unusual behavior from women he met. He usually looked at her with new eyes. As he told her before, he never had a female friend, and the idea definitely sounded intriguing. But he could definitely use a friend. Yeah, how long are they going to remain friends, right? He told himself as she left, "Be patient." And he watched her disappear into the darkness. "She's every bit as wild and wounded as any of those animals you rescued. Give her time, give her space, win her trust, and then you can woo her and make her yours." But if Devon had learned anything from wild animals he fostered, it was how to bide his time. And with a woman like Pippa, she was worth the wait. Isn't that wonderful? Oh. Even though the air was cool on her way home, she felt like she met someone safe. And realized that she was lying to herself with that word, especially emotionally. She was far more attractive than she wanted to be. But she was still hopeful and optimistic concerning her picnic with him on Sunday. Pippa was even more excited about the upcoming picnic now that she had been with a conversation with her father. Maybe Devon knew the answers to some of her questions. Maybe he even knew the answers to who his mother was. Pippa couldn't wait to ask him on Sunday. I'm just hitting tidbits out of the book, and I hope that you pick up this book, and I'm hoping that I'm intriguing you to want to pick up this book. On the other hand, Pippa had never needed her mother more than she did now, so maybe it was time he reached out to Jeannie, time he told her that she had a daughter, and that she, even though she believed that she had died at birth. There's a backstory. See, Pippa's mother has been out of the picture. And it's been that old feud, family feud going on. And so they told her that she was dead on arrival, the baby that is, but she didn't know her daughter was not in fact dead. She was birthed to the world and given, she thought she was dead. So to her, she was dead, but really she was given back to her father. Her father then went to Australia, and she's had 19 years in Australia, not knowing that her mother's alive because her dad even told her that her mom was dead. So then it gets complicated, as all good books do. Page 76. When she realized the meadow, he waved to her, From the other side, good day. Good day to you too. And he looks glad to see you, so am I. And be his friend. Don't spoil it by wanting more. She's so glad to see him. And there's a blanket, and he spreads it out. What a great idea. And they talk. And then they talk about their plans for the future. She wants a house and several babies and horses, basically. I'm trying to cut it short down everything that I marked because I'm a little tired too. And so they kid each other about what they're going to eat. Of course, it's chicken. And they talk about how the marriage of convenience with the other book, which is sinful. So I always say, read that book first, read this book second, so you understand it. For a moment, he thought he wanted to prolong his closeness the same way he did. I'm sorry, I can't be more than a friend. That's not enough. Pippa, slow down, tell me what's wrong. I don't think friendship is going to work. And then she ran. And Devon is like, he could understand the impulse of the wolf wanting to chase after her, but he calls the wolf back. He even says, Pippa, don't leave. Let's talk. What's bothering you? And she wants to go, Wolf. We have to let her go. So she ends up leaving. And the wolf makes a growling sound low in his throat, and he's like, I know the same thing, so what are we going to do to get her back? I love that. Devon is already making a plan to get this woman back because he feels this bond with her. Oh. She should have stayed and talked to Devon, explained that her life was complicated, that it wasn't anything to do with him, that she couldn't get romantically involved with anyone, but that would have been explaining that she had 3 months pregnant, that she'd been duped by a married man, that would have meant exposing her soft underbelly to someone with the power to rip out her guts. How had Devon Flynn slipped past her defenses so quickly? How had he made her care? Why had she befriended him when she'd been so sure after what Tim had done that she would never be able to trust again another man? Isn't that good writing right there? Just pulls you right in. Why hadn't she discussed what happened with him rather than running away? She cut herself off from one friend that she might have had in this place. But was there really any way to take back that kiss and be friends again? Oh. She comes home and her baby brother's missing. And so, let's see. They do find him behind the curtains. And her dad kind of scolds her and tells her, is this what you're going to do basically when you have your kid? And needless to say, that's not what she needed to hear. And about that time, she learns that her mom is not dead. And she learns that she was in a foster home, and he took her out of the foster home to raise because he loved her and wanted to raise, and she was his daughter. And he was once told that her mother and her was dead in a car wreck, but found out that wasn't true. So that's why he's kind of wanting the daughter, to give the baby up. And then she comes to the realization that her mom's alive. How it's mixed emotions. It's wonderful, startling news, and she asked, can she meet her mom? And his face looked straightened and replied, your mother's Jennifer Fairchild, now Fairchild Hart, living on one of her grandparents' ranch in Texas. How long have you known she was alive, and how did you find her? Uncle Angus found her a long time ago. Pippa stared at her father first, along with a spurt of anger. Why didn't you say something to me sooner? You know, this is what spurs her anger on. And then she learns about the past between her father and her mother. And She doesn't know if she can forgive her dad for not telling her sooner. And she's like, why are you telling me this all now? Because I worry about you, and I worry about this big job that you're wanting to take on. And she's like telling him, no, you're wrong. I can handle it all. And then he remembers the past and goes down memory lane a little bit. She has troublesome nights sleeping and wanting to talk about, her mom and thinking about her mom. And then Taylor, which is one of her aunts, talks with her, and they kind of have words. Move forward. And this is when she gets upset and she wonders where to go from here. And that's when Devon comes in the picture again. And she stays at his ranch in another room at first. And they confide in each other about the Brats, which is her aunts, again, remind you. And she's not told him about the child she's expecting because she doesn't want anyone to know about that. And they share several good moments, and I'm going to leave you with that. I'm even taking the paper clips out as I speak, because I want you to read this book on your own to realize how good it is. And yeah, I'm not gushing over it. That's why I'm giving it a 25, because the other one was a little bit more believable because he didn't have a pet wolf. But this one gets a 25. That makes it a must-read, outstanding read. And she's now one of my favorite authors. Just got to say, I moved her up to one of my favorite authors. So pick up this book. And now, keep your social distance. Wear your mask. Wash your hands when you can't. Use your hand sanitizer. And I am doing a relationship review. Where's my microphone? There it is. Probably tomorrow night I will be helping you all out with your burning questions. Will I give you a hint of what I'm going to wear for Halloween? Absolutely not. That's my priority in life, to keep you on the edge of your seat. So I leave you tonight with that. God bless. Best wishes till we meet again.